happened at work recently a few months ago. I was just at work minding my business and I got a ping on our internal chat tool, and one of my colleagues reached out. Hi, do you remember me? I'm like, no, I don't. She's like, I was considering moving to the US for school many years ago, and I spoke with you and you helped me with this and that, and I just wanted to say thank you. It was in that moment I realized I have been doing this. I have been talking about grad school, helping people get admission abroad and funding for almost 6 years. That is so unbelievable for me. And in all those 5+ years, the biggest question, the biggest challenge people have is doing, how do I get funding? In this video and the next ones, we will focus on 6 funding options that you have. Yes, you have up to 6 options to fund your education. We will also talk about tips and tricks to help you get the most funding that you possibly can get. And lastly, we will talk about the mistakes you should avoid. The mistakes a lot of people make year in, year out that I think you, my friend, should really avoid. So these are the 3 things we'll talk about in the next few videos. And today we'll be starting with the very first funding option. The 6 funding options that we'll cover are scholarships, that's school scholarship or external scholarships. We'll also talk about GATARA funding. We'll also talk about loans, and then we'll talk about internship payback. We will also talk about getting jobs as a student, and then lastly we'll talk about some sort of sponsorship letters. So let's start with scholarships. There are 2 types, 2 main types. One is external scholarships or external funding, and 2 is school funding. So let's start with the external one. These are scholarships like the Chevening scholarships in the UK, and like MasterCard Foundation that sponsors schools, I believe, in the US, in Canada. I'm not sure about the UK, but those are very popular examples. Now, what do you need to know about these external scholarships? One, they are awesome. They provide a lot of funding for the students. They typically will cover your full tuition. Some of them even cover your accommodation and living expenses and your flights to school. Like, they are really robust. That is the first thing that you need to know about external funding. If you get them, you're settled, you're fine. Like, we don't need to worry about you anymore. So they're very robust. They provide really robust funding. The second thing to know about external scholarships is they are very competitive. Okay, everybody likes a good thing or a good lunch. Everybody wants to get this kind of scholarship, so they end up being very competitive because they're taking applications from applicants all over the world. They are reviewing over a few months. Like, it's big. So that's the second thing you need to know, that it is competitive and you need to put your best foot forward for this one. Another thing you need to know about this type of funding is they typically involve you writing essays, some sort of essays or some sort of writing that shares a bit about your experience, why you're the best person to receive this scholarship. You need to write something typically about yourself. So that's another thing you need to know, and you need to start practicing how you're going to write those very great essays, so you stand a good chance. One more thing to note is these scholarships could either be corporate funded or government funded. So some governments offer very good scholarships for students that are going to study specific programs, or they are going to specific schools or programs, and they just sponsor them. There used to be one in Nigeria so many years ago before I came to grad school. Even while I was in grad school, I'm not sure it's still there, but that's an example of government funded external scholarship. They fund citizens that are going to countries to study specific programs. Singapore has some of those as well, where they sponsor citizens. So just check what your government offers for doing a PhD, for doing a master's and MBA in certain countries. Then there are the corporate ones, like the MasterCard Foundation ones that are sponsored by specific private entities and just fund a couple of students every year. These external funding options also have strict deadlines. So the moment you realize you want to, or the moment you decide that you are going to apply to schools this year, you need to look out for those external funding options. Just do a Google search, companies or funding options or scholarships that exist for students going to study this kind of program. That's all you need to do. You need to know that they have strict deadlines and you cannot be even 1 day late. So check those out, and I have a couple in my fully funded list of programs that I will also put in the description. It's a lot of templates for you, and also includes scholarships across the world and fully funded programs that you can explore. So you can find a couple of options there as well. One more thing to note about external scholarships is for some of them you can apply before you get your admission offer. For some, you cannot apply before you get your admission offer. So just pay attention to some of these details, because a lot of people miss out on these opportunities because they were like, I didn't know I could apply before getting my admission offer. For some of them, you can absolutely apply, and for others, you can't apply. So just look out for these details and make sure you apply early as well. Now that we've talked about external scholarships, let's now move to school funding. There are two main types of school funding or school scholarships, and I'll add a third one. The first is merit-based, the second is need-based, and the third is what I'm calling special school scholarships. So those are the three types, and we can go into more detail about each of them now. So let's talk about merit-based. This is typically that funding that you get after the school has reviewed your application, they've compared you to other candidates applying that year to the school, and then they determine this is the amount of funding we want to give this person. These scholarships are great. A school typically has a lot of donations from their alumni, and they use these to fund new students coming into the school. For you to really get the most out of this merit-based scholarship, you need to apply to a very good mix of schools, and then you need to submit awesome applications. Like I always tell people, put in the work to get your application really great, your resume, your essays, and all of that, so that you have a good chance at getting good funding from the school. This is your best bet. So all you need to do, my friend, is make sure you're applying to schools that have money. We'll talk about that later. And make sure that you are really putting all your best into that application, different aspects of the application. And we'll cover all those aspects later in this series that I'm doing. But make sure you have enough time to put in the work to submit a great application. While we're still on the topic of merit-based scholarships, I do want to mention a few call-outs, things that you should really pay attention to. One is some schools just have more money than other schools, and that's because they have a very strong alumni, very wealthy alumni that always donate to the school, that always give a lot of funding to the school. So that's not something you can change or control, but make sure you're applying to some of these schools that just have more funding. And maybe you have that question, doing how on earth will I know that a school has funding? Check schools that have huge endowments. You can find that online, schools with the biggest endowment. You can also figure out schools that have existed for so long and have built a very good alumni base. Those schools just typically have more funding. Also, the more competitive schools just have more funding. That's what I've noticed as well. So don't just apply to schools that are easy to get. They may be easy to get into, but they don't have a lot of funding for you. Also apply to some schools that are more competitive, more difficult to get into, but when you get in, they just have the dollars to support your education. So it's a balance, and you want to make sure you're applying to a good mix of schools. So the first thing I want to call out is some schools just have more money than other schools. The second thing I want you to know, my friend, is destination matters. Some countries are just known to offer more funding to students than other countries. For instance, a lot of people know that the UK, when you get into some schools for your masters in the UK, you don't get a lot of funding versus the US. And there may be other countries out there that even provide more funding than US schools. Just do a bit of research and figure out what are the best destinations if you're optimizing for money, optimizing for funding. You know that if I get into this program, maybe I just can't afford it. I don't have that financial backing. I can't afford it. So now is your time to focus on destinations that offer students more funding. Now, this is not saying don't apply to the UK or don't apply to specific countries. You should, but also apply to a mix of countries. That's what I would do if I were you and I know that I just can't fund my education. So that's the second thing that you should do. The third thing I want you to know is STEM programs have more funding than other programs. Listen, I am not saying everyone has to do a STEM program, but what I've noticed in the many years I've been doing this is STEM programs just have more funding. If you go into a program that is considered science, tech, engineering, math, in that area, you're likely to get more funding. So your job, even if you're doing a business program, for instance, is to figure out if there's a way that can be combined with like a more STEM program. So that's something you need to explore, because STEM programs just get a lot of funding from organizations, from governments, and all of that right now. So you should absolutely explore that. All right, let's talk about need-based funding. So typically, many schools reserve some funding for students they believe are very great for their class, but they know they may not be able to afford their tuition or living expenses or things like that. So they reserve some funding every year for need, to support people in need, to support students that have need for the cash. So that's need-based funding. And the way for you to unlock this need-based funding is to ask. So many times, a lot of students, especially international students, don't realize that schools have funding to support students in need. Now, all you need to do is email the school and ask them for more funding. And I'll talk about how you can do that successfully. But one more thing to note is sometimes this need-based funding, they are targeted at students with specific backgrounds. And that's because the people, the companies, the organizations that provided the fund were specific. Let me give you an example. I graduated from Yale many years, or a few years from now, when I'm so boxed up and I have a lot of money, I could go back to Yale and say, hey, I'm donating $500 million. Amen. I'm donating $500 million for you to support women of African descent coming into this school, or women that are Africans, or African women coming into this program. That's an example. I was very specific. All I'm saying is, do not use a dime of my $500 million for students that are not African women. So sometimes those need-based scholarships are very specific. They are for people with specific backgrounds. But all you still need to do to unlock this is to ask the school, because they don't advertise to say, don't you contributed this? No, they just have it. And then when they find students that meet the criteria that I have set as the donor, then they offer those students the funding. And sometimes if the student doesn't ask, they just don't offer you the funding, because they are not obligated to offer that out to you that year. So what you need to do is ask the school for more funding, and that's when you realize they had something left for need-based to offer on a need basis. So for you to get this funding, you need to ask the school, you need to tell them why you need it, you need to tell them about your situation and why this funding is what you really need to be able to join the class that year. So I have a template in the description that just gives you the email that you need to send to this school so that you can get this funding. If you want to write it yourself, it's a simple email just talking about your background and your reason for needing that money. And then if you want my email, because I have done this many times, asking schools for more, for myself, for my clients, for my friends as well, you can just copy my email and I'll put a link to that template email in the description. Earlier in this video, I talked about a third option that I'm creating myself. I called it a special school funding. Now, these are the ones that I believe they are a hybrid between school scholarships and external scholarships. They are school scholarships really, but they are administered almost like external scholarships. An example here is Knight Hennessy scholarships at Stanford. This is such a beautiful scholarship program. You should check it out. Stanford didn't pay me for this, but you get it. All right, so these kind of scholarships are owned by the school, administered by the school, but they are administered similar to how external scholarships work. For these scholarships, anyone can apply, and typically they will only fund after you've gotten admission into the school and all of that. So you still need to get into that school, but you will write essays. They are big scholarships, the same way like a MasterCard Foundation scholarship works, the same way thousands of people are writing essays, are applying before the deadline. That's exactly how these scholarships are as well, but these ones will only fund students going to a specific school like Stanford. So there's that Stanford Knight Hennessy scholarship. So that's an example here. You should also ask the school if they have big special scholarships like that one. So that's one more funding option that I want you to explore, and this one is typically offered by big schools with a lot of funding, with a lot of endowment. So Yes, explore these schools and ask them about scholarships like this. The next funding option we'll talk about, my friend, is the GATARA type funding. And this is a really good opportunity for you to get some extra funding after you've gotten some merit or need-based funding. If you still need extra cash, you need to explore GATARA positions, and I'll talk about all things GATARA in the next video in this series, so make sure you click that one. Hi my friend, hope you found today's video helpful so far. See, today's video is part of a series of videos that I'm doing to help you navigate the entire application, funding, visa process. So all these videos over the next few weeks will just be added to a single playlist, and that playlist will be in my description. If you click that playlist, you will find all these videos and you will be able to navigate the entire application process by yourself. So if you have any friend that you know is applying to schools in the US, the UK, Canada, Australia this year, and they cannot afford to have an admissions coach, please send them this single link so they can navigate the entire process as well. Be nice to them. So send this link to them. Alrighty, my friend, that's it for today. Let's meet in the next video. I'll see you.